Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This is going to be a different style of video that I've normally done. So what I was planning on doing for talking about soloing and Lord of the Rings Online, I wanted to make a comprehensive guide kind of talking about like different strategies and stuff like that. But when it comes to Lotro, the only really area where you got to worry about too many strategies is if you're playing on the higher landscape difficulties, which I don't really feel like that's something that I necessarily want to make a strategy guide for at this time. But I do want to go over every single class and kind of talk about what classes are really, really good for their solo ability, which ones are more viable and which ones are not as viable as a solo class in the game. Because I really just think that, especially if you're trying to do a higher level challenge, like maybe doing something on Fearless or Heroic, then it definitely does make a difference what class that you will pick. And so without further ado, we're going to dive into it. We're just going to go down this list. There's only one class that I actually have not played as, and that is the Mariner. So what I'm going to do to compensate for that is I'm just going to change this and just put haven't played, because I don't want to... I can't say anything specifically about the Mariner class in that aspect because I have not played as them, so I don't want to give a fair unfair review on the Mariners as a class as we dive into this. But I do want to just talk about this, that this is updated as of November 2025. If there are any major updates or class reworks that will happen, I will definitely be talking about them and possibly making another solo player tier list the deeper we go into our time playing Lotro. So yeah, starting off, we have Beorning. Beornings, in terms of solo classes, this is kind of a pretty easy one. They have a very, very, very high damage output. They have a really, really good self-sustain, and they are a very naturally tanky class. I think in terms of just the Lotro classes in general, they have the most universal versatility. So I would definitely say that Beornings are one of arguably the best. I think the other class we'll get into as another option for the best solo class, but we'll get into that in just a second. Second class is going to be the Minstrel. I'm going to put them in B tier. Minstrels, in terms of their solo viability, they have decent everything. My first class that I played was a Minstrel, and I do very much enjoy the class. I think they're super fun, but I think they excel the best in a group capacity. If you're running a DPS style mini, you can have a bunch of different styles of combat. You can run a ton of damage outputs. You can run, you can get good damage. You can get good buffs, but they really are going to excel their best if they're played in a healing capacity. I think they have a lot more DPS viability than what they've had in the past, but I think in terms of their solo play, they don't necessarily, especially at the higher difficulties, they don't do enough damage to, I think, really be able to justify them being in an A tier. Once you kind of start picking up that landscape difficulty, it is going to become more and more... I'm going to turn the music way down just to compensate for my mic here. So sorry, everybody. But they're just not going to do enough damage to compensate for their lack of tankiness. So if you're fighting like a bear or something, or especially if you're doing what I did and playing on a higher landscape difficulty in Angmar or Mordor, then it's going to become a lot more difficult to be able to get to where you want to be, because if anybody gets close to you, you're just dead. So because of that, minis, I'm gonna put them in B tier. Next up, we have my personal favorite class in the game, which is the Rune-keeper. I'm putting them at A tier for their solo viability, not because of my own personal preferences. I do genuinely believe they have such a high enough damage output, and especially if you run like a yellow line Rune-keeper, you have a ton of mobility as well, so you can just keep throwing out your DPS spells. Their biggest thing that prevents them from being an S tier is they are super squishy, so if enemies do damage to you, you can die relatively easily. The next thing that I would say that would make their viability a little bit more lackluster in terms of solo play is because of the attunement bar that you have to deal with. If your attunement bar is not set up for heals, you're really not going to be healing much. Like, even when I try to heal, and I don't, on my main, I don't play on a higher landscape difficulty. I did, but then I turned it off because it was just, I was trying to just use them to level up, and I was just like, you know, I'm not really overly interested in grinding for these at this moment. But I'll make a Beorning when I eventually want to do that. Anyways, so with the Rune-keeper is... even at like level 47 with the gear that I have, I'm only healing like for 12 health at a time, which is like a nice little touch. If I'm like running away, it gives me a little bit of extra sustainability, but not if I'm like neck deep in a fight. And so anytime I try to heal as well, it nerfs my DPS. So I really want to, like, that's the only reason why Rune-keepers aren't the most viable that way. And if you're playing like a redline Rune-keeper, you're going to be taking a bunch of time to cast your spells, and you just aren't going to have a high enough DPS output with the Rune-keeper without having somebody else as your front line. Next up, we have Wardens. Wardens, I think they are infinitely more solo player viable than the Rune-keepers. The only thing that prevents them from being in A tier purely is how complicated the gambits are. If you are playing a Warden, they're carpal tunnel the class. I do plan on, when I do bring my permadeath challenge back, I'm going to actually start back as a Warden. Which is weird because my hands have problems, but that's a different thing. But anyways, what this basically is going to do is the Wardens have a ton of great options for staying alive. They're an off tank, they do good DPS, and they have really good sustainability. They have all of the things that a Beorning would have. The biggest thing that they are lacking, that makes them so much more like not as viable as a Beorning, that prevents them from going into S tier, is it takes a ton of learning to be able to figure out how you are going to build your gambits and do your combos to keep yourself alive. I think when you actually get it, it is stupidly satisfying, and it's probably one of the most fun things you can do. However, it is really, really tough to be able to get to that point. And I genuinely just don't think that they are worth it if you're wanting to do soloing at high difficulties. Anything if you're playing on now, I'm going to give a little quick clarification here on this. If you're doing any of this on just like the base difficulty without any additional Paths of Valor or anything like that, I genuinely think you can play any class solo. I don't think there's any class that's going to be good or bad, as just the natural landscape and base difficulty is relatively easy, because Lotro is not meant to be a difficult game unless you wanted to add that difficulty with the Path to Valor. So yeah, that's really kind of all that there is for that. So yeah, I almost spilled my, or did I spill my tea? I did not spill the tea. That's good. Up next, we have Brawlers. Brawlers, I'm going to put them... I'm torn. I don't know if they're quite A tier, but I also haven't played too much of a Brawler. I have one Brawler right now. He's level 20, and they do I'm playing a Redline Brawler. They do a ton of damage. I haven't messed with anything blue line for them, so I don't know how viable their blue line would be, but I've made it to level 20 on the base difficulty without dying, and I've managed to do that, which I'm pretty proud of. The thing with Brawlers, they do an absurd amount of damage, and I think that's what's going to bring them up into A tier. I think personally they are the highest damaged, highest DPS melee class. I could be wrong. I'm not too familiar with the champions. That's another class I need to play more of. So there's that. And then, so that's kind of one thing to think about. That's kind of like one drawback is they might... Sorry, I don't know what I'm saying. They do a ton of good damage. They are very tanky. They have a lot of natural defense to them. My big drawback is they don't really have any self-heals. They have a little bit, but it's not a ton. So I think because of that, if you get in, like if a Wraith spawns on you after a difficult fight, you're just done on Angmar or Mordor. But that's something that could be a big deal. It could not be. I don't know. It's weird to think about. But I do think that the Brawlers have good enough solo viability that you could make it work. Yeah, that's pretty much all I gotta say about that. Up next is Burglars. Burglars, on a higher difficulty as a solo class, they're not it. I tried to get through a good chunk of the stories and stuff on Heroic. As a burglar, doing it solo. And I think I had like 20 deaths before I even like got to Bree. And at that point, I'm like, this isn't even really fun. So that's something where if I am doing any sort of solo play as a burglar, I just know I don't wanna. They're fantastic in fellowships. They have a ton of fellowship viability. They're a class that can initiate fellowship maneuvers. So I genuinely think that they are good in a group setting. I don't think they are good in a solo setting. I just don't think they do enough damage. Even if you were running a yellow line, their crowd control doesn't like mitigate the damage to keep you alive unless you're trying to run away. So I can't give them the love on that one. Up next, we have the Captain. Captain, I'm going to put in C tier. They don't have great damage. They don't have great heals, and they don't have a great buff or great tankiness. They're just kind of okay at everything. And kind of like the biggest reason why I put them in C tier over like the minis who are in B tier, where minis have good damage and they have good heals, but they don't have great damage, and that's why they're in B tier. But like the captains, they're just kind of okay in a solo capacity. They don't, in my opinion, do enough damage, or really they don't do enough to try and get it, like figure it out. Not necessarily get it or figure it out, but like they just aren't quite there, you know? They can't quite get to that point. And so I think that's an area where captains could do better. If you're looking to be a solo player, captains are not going to be where I would want to go. They're just okay at everything for solo play. They're not great. Up next, we have our champions. Champions, I think they're going to be pretty much like it's a toss-up between them and Brawlers for your best melee DPS class. They do a good amount of melee damage. They can get through content quickly. They have good AoE abilities. They're very strong, and for a long time, they were actually, I think, the most viable in Lotro speedruns, which is funny to think about. Which I've only done Elf intro, but that's because I'm waiting to get more Lotro points without having to spend money. Anyways, that's something that I think with champions, they do really good damage. They're a decent tank. I think the biggest difference between the champions and the brawlers is brawlers are going to have a higher defense and sustainability. And in your higher difficulties on the Paths of Valor, your higher landscape difficulties, it's important that you have more sustainability. And I think that's where the brawlers are going to win out over the champions in that regard. So up next, we have Guardians. Guardians are going to be kind of a similar vibe to the captains. If you wanted to run a Guardian solo blue line, you could do that for your sustainability, but you're going to be taking so long to get through any sort of content that it is just going to be extraordinarily difficult to get through, or it's just going to be an absolute grind. And so unless you're doing something where you're running a challenge with friends where you've got like a group of people you're running through content with a group of 4 at a higher passive valor, then yeah, you're going to want a guardian. But for something like solo play, their red line just doesn't do enough damage, and their red line doesn't do enough damage. Blue line is so tanky, but it's slow. And that's just not going to be fun for any sort of solo player. Up next, we have Hunter. Hunters are going to go back into D tier with the Burglars. Their rework didn't really do much for them in terms of solo play at higher difficulties. They're so squishy that if you're running red line, you're just going to get destroyed. Blue line gives you some form of mobility, but because Hunters are just such a squishy DPS, I don't think they're really viable for your high difficulty solo play. And so I really just think that if you are going to be doing any sort of solo play, a Hunter is just not the vibe. I know another streamer, Salindwin. I don't even know if I pronounce it Salindwin. I genuinely don't know how to actually pronounce your username. So sorry, Sally. But I'll link her Twitch in the description below. She plays a ton of Hunters, and she even said she was going through Angmar on the easiest difficulty, and it was really hard for her to do that as a Hunter without any sort of landscape. So that's something where I would want to maybe advocate that if you're going to play a Hunter, don't do it solo on a legendary server. Get a group of friends, or even just one friend, just somebody to peel a little bit. Like, I think one of the best combinations you could honestly do if you're 2 people is just do Guardian Hunter. Just so that way you have, or even like Warden Hunter would probably be really cool. Maybe I'll convince somebody to run like super difficult content with me at that, like just do 2 of us, and I think that will be fun. Last but not least is Lore Master. Lore Master is going to be your S tier. I think Beornings are going to be overall stronger, but Lore Masters do a stupid amount of damage. Their animal companions give you a stupid amount of sustainability, and they just overall are just such a strong class to put into the game that I think that's something that if you are running solo content, a Lore Master is where it is. I'm running a Redline Lore Master on Angmar right now just to try and catch up to some friends who are, I think they just got out of Moria, so like I'm really far behind because I'm doing it before the Shadow as well. But that's also something that'll be coming out because I'm planning on doing like a deep dive into the story of Lotaro. So I'm excited to kind of like do this in kind of a really fun like documentary style. It's going to be an ambitious project, and I'm going to be working on it for a long time before any of the videos come out. But that's something I'm working on, so be excited for that. It's a big video project. So that, but anyways, all that to be said, Lore Masters are stupidly strong, and so they're arguably going to be your best solo class. They're easy to use. I really don't think a Redline Lore Master is that difficult, and you'll stay alive forever. So I highly, highly recommend if you're wanting to do solo content, play as a Lore Master. They're extremely good for that. So yeah, so that's pretty much it for that. That's the tier list. I don't know why I pulled it away because I do want to pull it back up so that way you guys can see everything. This is how it's gonna be. This is that tier list. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This is something different. I know I haven't done a Lotaro tier list in a while, but I did want to talk about every single class in a solo play capacity. In like, I didn't want to go into like crazy reasonable depth. I might go into more like depth as I look at making a pretty extensive, maybe a passive valor guide or something like that. I haven't decided exactly what I want to do, but I'm still kind of looking into this. Eventually I'm going to get a Mariner, and I am going to play as a Mariner. So if that's something you guys are interested in watching me do, make sure you guys subscribe down below. I'm planning on trying to put out more Lotaro content, and that's kind of going to be a big focus from here on out. So, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you guys want more, make sure you guys like, comment. If you want anything, if you guys have any ideas for something goofy to do with Lotaro, please do let me know in the comments below what type of Lotaro content you would want to see. I'm excited to continue to play this game. I think it actually has become my favorite game of all time. So, yeah. With that, you are loved, you are valued, you are fearfully and wonderfully made, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye-bye.